A $13 billion aircraft carrier is designed to project power across oceans. Yet in certain regions of the world, that same vessel can suddenly operate within the range of hundreds of land-based missiles. The encounter between American carrier forces and Iran's missile network illustrates a structural reality of modern military strategy. When a carrier enters waters near the Persian Gulf, it does not simply represent a warship moving through international waters. It becomes the focal point of two competing systems of power: a mobile airbase built to dominate sea and sky, and a dense land-based missile network built to deny access to that space. Understanding that interaction requires stepping back from the moment itself. An aircraft carrier is not merely a ship. It is a floating airfield capable of launching dozens of combat aircraft hundreds of miles from shore. Modern American carriers, such as those in the Nimitz and Ford classes, displace close to 100,000 tons and carry an air wing of roughly 70 to 80 aircraft. These include strike fighters, surveillance aircraft, electronic warfare platforms, and helicopters that extend the ship's operational reach. The price tag attached to a modern carrier reflects that capability. The newest American carriers cost more than $13 billion to build before the aircraft and support systems are even counted. The reason for that cost is simple. Carriers allow a country to move a complete air power system anywhere in the world without relying on foreign bases. For decades, this capability formed the backbone of U.S. global military strategy. A carrier group can arrive near a crisis zone and immediately establish air operations. Aircraft can strike targets hundreds of miles inland, enforce maritime control over shipping lanes, or support ground forces during conflicts. The ship itself becomes the center of a large operational network. But carriers never operate alone. Each carrier normally sails as the center of a carrier strike group. This group includes guided missile destroyers, sometimes cruisers, attack submarines, supply ships, and surveillance aircraft. Together, these assets form a layered system designed to detect threats early and intercept them long before they reach the carrier itself. This defensive structure exists because carriers represent both enormous capability and enormous value. In strategic terms, they concentrate power. A single carrier air wing can deliver hundreds of precision strikes during sustained operations. The presence of such capability close to a contested region sends a clear signal about military readiness and deterrence. When a carrier enters a region, it communicates that a nation has both the capacity and the intention to project power there. But concentration of power creates another effect. It also creates a concentrated target. From the perspective of countries that cannot match the United States ship for ship, destroying or disabling a carrier would represent a major strategic victory. The logic becomes straightforward. If one vessel holds such a large portion of deployable air power, then threatening that vessel becomes a way to challenge the entire system built around it. Over the past 2 decades, several countries have studied this problem carefully. Rather than building large navies that compete directly with carrier fleets, they have invested in land-based missile systems capable of reaching far into nearby seas. These missiles can be launched from mobile vehicles, underground facilities, coastal batteries, or aircraft. Their purpose is not necessarily to destroy every ship approaching the coastline. Their purpose is to make the approach dangerous enough that adversaries must think carefully before entering. This strategic approach is known as anti-access and area denial, often abbreviated as A2AD. The concept describes a layered defensive network designed to keep opposing forces at distance. Long-range missiles threaten ships hundreds of miles from shore. Shorter-range systems protect the coastline itself. Radar networks and surveillance drones provide targeting information. The combined effect is a defensive umbrella extending outward from land. Iran has spent years building a version of this system across the Persian Gulf and surrounding waters. Its military planners understand that competing directly with the U.S. Navy in open ocean warfare would be extremely difficult. Instead, they focus on building tools that increase the cost and risk of operating near Iranian territory. These tools include anti-ship ballistic missiles, cruise missiles launched from coastal batteries, fast naval craft, and increasingly sophisticated drones capable of tracking ships at sea. Each element alone represents a limited threat. Together they form a network designed to complicate naval operations. When an American aircraft carrier enters this environment, it does not face a single missile battery or isolated weapons platform. It encounters a layered strategic system built specifically to challenge large naval formations. The result is a situation where two very different military philosophies meet in the same space. One system projects power outward across oceans through mobile naval air bases. The other system defends coastal regions by saturating nearby waters with missile coverage. Moments when these systems intersect often appear in headlines as isolated confrontations. A carrier sails into a region, missile units move into position, radar systems begin tracking movements across the sea. Yet the visible moment represents only the surface of a much larger strategic structure. To understand why such encounters matter, it is necessary to examine the role aircraft carriers play in global power projection and why they remain central to modern military strategy. An aircraft carrier allows a country to move an entire airbase across the ocean. Instead of relying on foreign territory or nearby allies, the runway itself travels with the fleet. This capability sits at the center of American military strategy. Since the end of the Second World War, carriers have allowed the United States to operate aircraft anywhere major oceans connect to land. They provide a way to respond to crises quickly without waiting for diplomatic agreements to use local airfields. To understand why this matters, it helps to consider the limitations of traditional air power. Most combat aircraft require long, fixed runways. Those runways exist inside national borders. If a conflict breaks out far from friendly territory, aircraft may have difficulty reaching the area or staying there for extended periods. Political agreements must be negotiated with nearby countries to allow basing rights, and those agreements can change quickly depending on domestic politics. An aircraft carrier removes that dependency. The carrier itself acts as a floating runway more than 300 meters long. Catapult systems accelerate aircraft to takeoff speed in a matter of seconds, launching them into the air even when the ship is moving through waves and wind. Arresting cables stretched across the deck allow those same aircraft to land again within a very short distance. This system allows dozens of aircraft to operate continuously at sea. Modern American carriers usually deploy with an air wing composed of several types of aircraft. The most visible are strike fighters, such as the F/A-18 Super Hornet. These aircraft carry precision-guided munitions and are capable of attacking targets on land or at sea. Alongside them operate surveillance aircraft that monitor the surrounding airspace. Electronic warfare aircraft jam enemy radar and communications systems. Helicopters conduct search and rescue missions and track submarines beneath the surface. Each of these aircraft plays a specific role within the larger system. Together, they create an air power package that can operate hundreds of miles from the ship itself. Strike fighters can travel deep inland. Surveillance aircraft extend radar coverage far beyond the horizon. Tanker aircraft refuel others in the air, increasing the distance they can travel before returning to the carrier. The result is a mobile network of sensors, weapons, and command systems that moves with the fleet. But aircraft alone do not define a carrier's influence. A carrier also serves as a command center. Inside the ship, large operations rooms coordinate aircraft launches, radar information, communications with other ships, and intelligence gathered from satellites and reconnaissance aircraft. This command structure allows the carrier strike group to function as a single integrated force, rather than a collection of independent vessels. The carrier strike group normally includes several guided missile destroyers equipped with advanced radar systems and interceptor missiles. These ships form the outer defensive layer, protecting the carrier from air and missile threats. Attack submarines may operate quietly ahead of the fleet, monitoring underwater activity and deterring enemy submarines. Supply ships also travel with the group, delivering fuel, ammunition, and spare parts. Without this logistical network, sustained operations at sea would not be possible. When these elements operate together, the carrier strike group becomes one of the most complex military systems ever built. The strategic value of that system comes from flexibility. Carriers can reposition quickly in response to changing events. A group sailing through the Mediterranean can shift toward the Middle East within days. A carrier operating in the Pacific can move along thousands of miles of coastline while remaining outside territorial waters. This mobility makes carriers powerful tools of deterrence. Deterrence refers to the ability to discourage adversaries from taking certain actions because the potential consequences appear too costly. The visible presence of a carrier group signals that air power and precision strike capability are already nearby. In many situations, that signal alone can influence decisions before conflict begins. Carriers also allow sustained operations during extended conflicts. Aircraft can launch sorties repeatedly over many days while the ship remains at sea. During past military campaigns, carrier aircraft conducted thousands of missions ranging from reconnaissance to air defense and precision strike. Yet the same qualities that make carriers powerful also create strategic vulnerabilities. A carrier concentrates large amounts of capability in one location. The ship itself is extremely large and difficult to conceal. Radar satellites, reconnaissance aircraft, and maritime surveillance systems can detect large naval formations operating in open water. Once a carrier's approximate location is known, adversaries may attempt to target it using long-range weapons. During earlier periods of naval warfare, the primary threat came from aircraft or submarines attempting to close distance with the fleet. Modern missile technology introduces a different challenge. Weapons launched from land can travel hundreds or even thousands of kilometers before reaching their targets. This development changes the geometry of naval power. Instead of needing to approach closely with aircraft or ships, a country may attempt to strike from its own territory. Mobile launchers hidden along coastlines can fire missiles that travel across large sections of ocean. Some missiles fly at low altitude above the sea to avoid radar detection. Others follow high trajectories before descending at high speed toward their targets. For countries facing powerful naval forces, these weapons offer a way to counterbalance maritime disadvantage. Iran represents one of the clearest examples of this approach. Rather than building a fleet designed to challenge American carrier groups directly in open ocean battle, Iran has invested heavily in missile forces capable of threatening ships operating near its coastline. The geographic environment of the Persian Gulf amplifies the importance of this strategy. The Gulf is relatively narrow compared with open ocean spaces. Shipping routes and naval movements often pass within range of land-based missile systems positioned along the coastline. This means that any large naval formation operating in the region must account for the possibility of missile launches from multiple directions. The presence of these weapons does not automatically prevent carriers from operating there. Carrier strike groups include sophisticated radar systems and interceptor missiles designed to defeat incoming threats. Electronic warfare aircraft can disrupt guidance systems used by certain types of missiles. But the interaction between carrier power projection and land-based missile networks creates a strategic contest that continues to evolve. Understanding that contest requires examining the missile strategy developed by Iran and how it fits into a broader military concept designed to limit access to nearby seas. For a country facing a navy as large as that of the United States, matching ships with ships is rarely a practical strategy. Building aircraft carriers, large destroyers, and advanced submarines requires decades of industrial investment and enormous financial resources. Few nations possess the economic capacity or technological base required to compete directly in that domain. Iran approached the problem from a different angle. Instead of trying to replicate American naval power, Iranian military planners focused on developing weapons that could threaten large ships from land. The logic behind this approach is straightforward. If a powerful navy relies on moving large vessels close to a region, then preventing those vessels from approaching becomes a way to limit their effectiveness. Missiles became the central tool for implementing that strategy. Over the past 2 decades, Iran has built one of the largest missile arsenals in the Middle East. These systems include both ballistic missiles and cruise missiles designed to strike targets at sea. Each type of missile follows a different flight profile and presents different challenges for naval defense systems. A ballistic missile typically follows a high arc through the upper atmosphere before descending toward its target. After launch, the missile's rocket engine propels it upward at high speed. Once the engine burns out, the missile continues along a trajectory determined by gravity and momentum. As it returns toward the Earth, it can reach extremely high velocities. Some modern ballistic missiles are designed specifically to target ships at sea. These are sometimes called anti-ship ballistic missiles. They use radar or satellite guidance to locate large vessels and adjust their path during the final phase of flight. The speed at which these weapons descend can make interception difficult. Cruise missiles operate differently. Rather than climbing high above the atmosphere, a cruise missile flies at relatively low altitude. Many travel just a few meters above the surface of the sea. This flight pattern allows the missile to remain hidden from radar systems until it approaches relatively close to the target. At that point, the missile's onboard guidance system directs it toward the ship. Iran has developed several variants of anti-ship cruise missiles that can be launched from coastal batteries, aircraft, or small naval vessels. These weapons are designed to strike the sides of ships at high speed, carrying warheads capable of causing significant damage. Missiles alone do not form the entire system. To strike ships effectively, missile forces must first detect and track them. Large naval formations are difficult to hide completely, but they still move across wide areas of ocean. Iran therefore relies on a network of sensors to monitor activity in nearby waters. These sensors include coastal radar stations positioned along the Persian Gulf, surveillance drones that patrol shipping lanes, and maritime patrol aircraft capable of observing naval movements. Information gathered from these sensors can be transmitted to missile units responsible for launching attacks. The combination of sensors and missile launchers forms a layered defensive network. This network reflects a broader strategic concept known as anti-access and area denial. The idea behind anti-access systems is to prevent opposing forces from entering a region in the first place. Area denial focuses on making operations inside that region difficult and dangerous if forces do manage to enter. Together, these strategies create a defensive perimeter extending outward from a country's territory. In the case of Iran, that perimeter stretches across large sections of the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. The strait itself represents one of the most important maritime choke points in the global energy system. A maritime choke point is a narrow water passage through which large volumes of international trade must travel. Roughly a fifth of the world's traded oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz each day, according to energy market data frequently cited by organizations such as the U.S. Energy Information Administration. Because the passage is narrow, ships moving through it remain relatively close to surrounding coastlines. This geography favors land-based missile systems. Launchers positioned along the Iranian coast can potentially reach large sections of the waterway. Even vessels operating deeper inside the Persian Gulf remain within range of many missile systems. From a strategic perspective, this allows Iran to threaten ships without needing to send large naval forces into open combat. Missiles are only one layer of the system. Iran's naval forces also operate large numbers of small, fast attack craft designed to move quickly through coastal waters. These boats can carry rockets, torpedoes, or short-range missiles. In large numbers, they can complicate defensive planning for larger warships, which must monitor multiple potential threats at once. Naval mines represent another tool within this strategy. Mines placed in shipping lanes can disrupt maritime traffic and force naval forces to conduct lengthy clearance operations before normal transit resumes. Drones have become increasingly important as well. Unmanned aerial vehicles can provide surveillance over large sections of ocean, tracking ship movements and relaying coordinates back to missile units. Some drones can also carry explosive payloads designed to strike ships directly. Each of these elements serves a specific function. Missiles provide long-range striking capability. Surveillance systems provide targeting information. Small boats and drones introduce additional uncertainty into naval operations. Mines threaten shipping routes and force adversaries to devote resources to defensive tasks. When combined, these tools form a layered strategy designed to complicate the movement of large naval forces. This does not mean the system guarantees success against carrier strike groups. The United States Navy operates some of the most advanced defensive technologies in the world. Destroyers equipped with Aegis radar systems can track incoming missiles and launch interceptors designed to destroy them in flight. Electronic warfare systems attempt to confuse guidance systems used by certain weapons. Yet the strategic objective of Iran's missile network is not necessarily to destroy every approaching ship. The objective is to raise the potential cost of operating near Iranian territory. If commanders must assume that multiple missile systems could be launched simultaneously from different locations, they must devote significant resources to detection, defense, and risk management. Even the possibility of such attacks influences operational planning. The result is a strategic environment in which carriers continue to operate in the region, but always within the shadow of a missile network designed specifically to challenge them. That interaction leads to a central question within modern naval strategy. How effective are the defensive systems protecting carrier strike groups against the growing range and speed of anti-ship missiles? The idea of a missile destroying an aircraft carrier often appears straightforward. A missile travels hundreds of kilometers, strikes the ship, and the vessel sinks. In practice, the situation is far more complex because a carrier strike group operates inside one of the most sophisticated defensive systems ever deployed at sea. A carrier is not defended by a single weapon or a single ship. Protection comes from multiple layers that operate simultaneously, each designed to detect, intercept, or disrupt threats at different distances. The outermost layer begins with detection. Carrier strike groups rely heavily on radar and airborne surveillance to identify potential threats long before they approach the fleet. Radar systems aboard escort ships scan hundreds of kilometers of airspace, tracking aircraft and missile launches. Aircraft such as the E-2 Hawkeye airborne early warning plane extend that radar coverage even further. These aircraft patrol high above the carrier group, watching for unusual activity across large sections of ocean. Because they operate at altitude, their radar can see much farther than radar mounted on ships closer to the water's surface. This early warning capability allows the strike group to detect missile launches or aircraft movements long before the weapons reach the fleet. Detection alone is not enough. Once a threat appears on radar screens, defensive systems must respond quickly. The next layer of defense is provided by escort ships equipped with advanced radar and interceptor missiles. American destroyers operating in carrier strike groups use the Aegis combat system, which integrates radar tracking with missile guidance. The radar identifies an incoming missile and calculates its trajectory. Interceptor missiles, such as the Standard Missile family, can then be launched to destroy the incoming weapon before it reaches the carrier. These interceptors do not simply collide with their targets randomly. Many use sophisticated guidance systems that track the incoming missile throughout its flight. Some interceptors detonate near the target, destroying it with fragments. Others rely on direct impact at extremely high speed. If the first intercept attempt fails, additional missiles can be launched. Defensive doctrine often involves firing multiple interceptors against a single incoming threat to increase the probability of destruction. This process is sometimes referred to as layered engagement, where different systems attempt interception at different distances from the fleet. Closer to the ships, additional defensive weapons become active. Some vessels carry short-range missile systems designed to destroy threats that penetrate the outer defenses. These missiles operate within shorter distances but respond extremely quickly. Their purpose is to intercept missiles that evade earlier layers of defense. Even closer to the ship itself, automated gun systems provide the final line of protection. Systems such as the Phalanx close-in weapon system fire thousands of rounds per minute to destroy incoming missiles within seconds of impact. Electronic warfare represents another important defensive tool. Certain aircraft within the carrier air wing specialize in electronic attack operations. These aircraft can jam radar signals used by missile guidance systems, making it more difficult for the weapon to locate its target accurately. Some systems attempt to deceive missiles by creating false radar signatures that draw the weapon away from the ship. Decoys also play a role. Ships can deploy devices that mimic the radar signature of a large vessel. When an incoming missile locks onto the decoy instead of the carrier, the weapon may detonate harmlessly at a distance. These techniques complicate the targeting process for attacking forces. Despite these defenses, missile technology continues to evolve. Some anti-ship missiles now travel at supersonic or even hypersonic speeds. A supersonic missile travels faster than the speed of sound. Hypersonic weapons move even faster, sometimes exceeding 5 times the speed of sound. Higher speeds reduce the time available for detection and interception. Certain missiles also perform evasive maneuvers during the final phase of flight, altering their trajectory in ways that make interception more difficult. Others approach at extremely low altitude, using the curvature of the Earth and the surface of the sea to remain hidden from radar until the last moments before impact. Another challenge arises from saturation attacks. Instead of launching a single missile, an attacker may launch many missiles simultaneously from different directions. The goal is to overwhelm defensive systems by forcing them to track and intercept multiple threats at once. Even advanced defensive systems have limits on how many targets they can engage at a given moment. For this reason, carrier strike groups rely on coordination between multiple ships and aircraft. Destroyers positioned at different locations around the carrier can engage incoming threats before they reach the center of the formation. Aircraft may attempt to intercept launch platforms before missiles are even fired. The strategic balance between missiles and naval defense therefore resembles a continuous technological competition. As missile systems become faster and more precise, defensive technologies evolve in response. Radar systems improve their detection capabilities. Interceptor missiles gain longer range and better guidance systems. Electronic warfare platforms develop new methods of disrupting targeting networks. The encounter between carriers and missile systems therefore reflects an ongoing adaptation between offensive and defensive capabilities. When an American carrier operates near the Persian Gulf, both sides understand the strategic stakes involved. Iranian missile forces possess the ability to threaten ships operating within range of their launch systems. At the same time, carrier strike groups maintain extensive defensive networks designed specifically to defeat those threats. This interaction does not guarantee conflict. Instead, it forms part of a larger deterrent structure. Each side demonstrates capability while calculating the risks associated with escalation. The presence of defensive systems does not remove the danger entirely, but it alters the calculations surrounding the use of force. Understanding this balance raises a broader question about the future of naval warfare and whether the growing spread of missile technology will eventually reshape the role aircraft carriers play in global strategy. The encounter between aircraft carriers and long-range missile networks is not limited to one region. It reflects a broader shift in how military power is developing across the world's oceans. For most of the 20th century, naval dominance depended primarily on the ability to control sea lanes with large surface fleets. Aircraft carriers became the central tool of that dominance after the Second World War. By carrying large numbers of combat aircraft, carriers allowed navies to strike targets far beyond the horizon and defend fleets against enemy aircraft. For decades, no weapon system seriously challenged this model. Even during the Cold War, while submarines and long-range bombers posed risks, carrier strike groups retained the ability to operate across large portions of the world's oceans. Their mobility allowed them to reposition quickly, making them difficult to track continuously. Their defensive systems evolved alongside emerging threats. Missile technology has begun to change that strategic equation. As precision guidance systems improved and missile ranges increased, the ability to threaten ships from land became more practical. Countries that lacked large naval fleets began investing in weapons capable of striking targets far from their own territory. These investments offered a way to counter naval power without building expensive carrier groups of their own. Several countries have pursued variations of this approach. China has developed long-range anti-ship ballistic missiles designed to threaten naval forces operating in the Western Pacific. Russia has invested in high-speed cruise missiles capable of striking ships from aircraft, submarines, or coastal launch platforms. Iran has focused on building a dense network of shorter-range systems covering the waters surrounding the Persian Gulf. Although the technologies differ, the strategic concept remains similar. Each system attempts to extend the reach of land-based defenses outward into nearby seas. By doing so, these countries seek to complicate the movement of foreign naval forces operating near their coasts. Instead of confronting fleets directly on the open ocean, they create environments where approaching ships must operate under constant threat of long-range attack. This approach reflects a broader change in the economics of warfare. Building and maintaining an aircraft carrier requires enormous financial resources. The ship itself costs billions of dollars, and its air wing, escort ships, and logistical support network add additional layers of expense. Training personnel to operate these systems requires years of preparation and extensive technical infrastructure. Missiles, by comparison, often cost far less to produce. Even advanced anti-ship missiles are significantly cheaper than the vessels they are designed to threaten. This difference creates what military analysts sometimes describe as an asymmetric relationship. A relatively inexpensive weapon may threaten a much more expensive platform. That imbalance does not automatically render carriers obsolete. Carriers remain one of the few systems capable of projecting sustained air power far from national territory. They provide flexibility that land-based systems cannot easily replicate. Aircraft launched from carriers can conduct reconnaissance, strike targets inland, enforce maritime control, and support allied forces across wide areas. Missiles, on their own, cannot replace those capabilities. Instead, they influence where and how carriers operate. Naval planners must account for the range of missile systems when positioning fleets. In some cases, carriers may operate farther from hostile coastlines, launching aircraft that travel greater distances before reaching their targets. Technological developments also continue to improve defensive capabilities. Interceptor missiles now have longer range and faster response times than earlier generations. Radar systems integrate data from multiple sensors, including satellites and aircraft, allowing fleets to detect threats earlier. Electronic warfare systems continue to evolve, complicating the targeting processes used by missile guidance systems. Unmanned technologies are also beginning to play a larger role. Drones launched from ships or land bases can extend surveillance coverage over large areas of ocean. Some drones can track naval movements, providing targeting information for missile systems. Others operate as defensive tools, scouting ahead of fleets or disrupting enemy sensors. These developments create a dynamic technological environment in which both offensive and defensive systems continue to adapt. Rather than replacing aircraft carriers, missile networks have introduced new constraints on how they are used. Naval forces must plan operations more carefully in regions where dense missile coverage exists. Carrier strike groups may rely more heavily on coordination with other military assets, including long-range aircraft and submarines. The strategic importance of maritime choke points also remains significant. Narrow waterways such as the Strait of Hormuz, the South China Sea passages, and other major shipping corridors carry large portions of global trade. Naval forces operating in these areas influence the security of shipping routes that connect energy markets and international supply chains. Because of this, carriers continue to play a visible role in demonstrating military presence in key regions. Their presence signals that a country possesses the ability to operate far from its own shores. Even when missile threats exist, the deployment of a carrier strike group communicates readiness and capability. That signal contributes to deterrence by showing that large naval forces remain active despite potential risks. At the same time, missile systems remind naval planners that technological competition continues to shape the future of warfare at sea. Each new defensive system prompts new offensive developments. Faster missiles encourage improvements in interception technology. Better surveillance systems drive the development of stealthier weapons and more sophisticated electronic warfare techniques. The interaction between carriers and missile networks therefore represents an ongoing evolution rather than a final conclusion. When a $13 billion aircraft carrier operates near a region protected by long-range missiles, the event reflects more than a single moment of tension. It reveals the meeting point between two strategic systems that continue to adapt to one another. One system relies on mobility, air power, and the ability to project force across oceans. The other relies on precision weapons and geographic advantage to challenge that movement. Understanding how those systems interact provides a clearer view of how naval strategy may evolve in the decades ahead.